They thought I was just their tired old mother, a burden in their home, waiting quietly for the day they'd finally ship me off to be forgotten. But that night, as I heard them whispering in the kitchen about selling my things and moving me into a facility, I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I just leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and whispered to myself, they don't know who they're dealing with, because I had something they could never take from me, my story, and what happened next would leave my children speechless. If you believe in karma, hit that like button and subscribe. The worn-out springs of my armchair groaned, a familiar protest as I shifted my weight. It was a sound as much a part of this house as the hum of the refrigerator or the distant, constant thrum of the city outside. They thought the sound was just an old chair complaining. They didn't know it was my throne. My name is Lorraine Carter. I am 80 years old, and to my son Darnell and his wife Tasha, I am a piece of furniture. A worn-out, inconvenient piece of furniture that takes up space in their pristine, beige-colored world. They see a tired old woman, a burden, a shadow in the corner, who dozes through afternoon game shows and waits quietly for the day. They finally work up the nerve to ship me off to be forgotten. They have no idea who they're dealing with. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to listen. The kitchen was their war room, their voices a low, conspiratorial hum beneath the clatter of dinner dishes. Tasha's voice, sharp and pragmatic, cut through the air. Can't keep this up, Darnell. The space alone. Her things are everywhere. That ancient sewing machine is a fire hazard. Then Darnell, my son, my only child. His voice, always so much softer, so easily led. We'll talk to her. We'll find a nice place. Somewhere with proper care. A nice place, a facility. The words were polished and clean, meant to sanitize the act of throwing away your own mother. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the hot sting of tears I might have felt a decade ago. Instead, a cold, familiar steel settled in my spine. I just leaned back in my chair, the old springs groaning their loyalty, and I whispered to the memory of my herald, to the ghosts of my past, to the fire that still burned in my chest. They don't know who they're dealing with, because they saw an old woman. They didn't see the story. They didn't see the miles walked, the battles fought, the pride forged in a fire they could never comprehend. That story was mine, and it was the one thing in this world they could never, ever take from me. For most of my life, I believed family was everything. It was the creed I lived by, the altar at which I sacrificed my youth, my strength, my dreams. I worked myself raw to raise Darnell, after Harold was taken from us far too soon. 2 jobs. Back when having 2 jobs meant your bones ached deep into the night and your feet swelled so badly you'd soak them in salt water and pray. I skipped dinners so my boy's plate could be full. I sewed his clothes from scraps and cast-offs, my fingers pricked and bleeding by lamplight, creating something presentable from nothing. I remember one winter, the bus just passed me by. The driver looked right through me, a young black woman, standing in the freezing rain. So I walked 3 miles home, my shoes with holes letting in the slush, my spirit colder than the wind, but I walked. I always walked. I bent my back and I bent my spirit so that my son could stand taller. I did it all for him, for this family. And now, the man that boy became looks at me like I'm some old photograph he can't wait to throw in the trash. A problem to be solved, a mouth to feed, a reminder of a past he'd rather forget. A past of struggle that embarrasses his present, of comfortable beige couches and silent disregard. But my grandchildren, Malik and Ayana, they are the light in this dim house. They are the reason my heart still beats with purpose. They see me, truly see me, not as a burden, but as a library, a living, breathing library. They sit at my feet at night, their eyes wide, begging for stories, not fairy tales. They want the real ones, the true ones. Tell us about the marches, Grandma, Malik would whisper, his small voice filled with a reverence his parents lacked. And I would tell them. I'd tell them about walking miles to a segregated school, while buses filled with white children sped past, their laughing faces pressed against the glass. I'd tell them about scrubbing dishes in spotless restaurants, where I wasn't even allowed to sit and eat a scrap of food. I'd tell them about holding their grandfather Harold's hand, his grip firm and sure, as we marched for the basic right to be seen as human, while police dogs snarled and snapped at our legs, their barks echoing the hatred in the eyes of the men holding the leashes. I told them about dignity, about survival, about a pride so deep and so fierce that nobody, no matter how powerful, could ever strip it away. And they listened. They leaned in close, as if the truth itself was a precious treasure being passed from my hands to theirs. One night, I saw it. Malik, his head bowed, as if in deep thought, had his little phone pressed discreetly into his lap. A tiny red light glowed. He was hitting record. He thought his old grandma was too blind, too lost in her memories, to notice. But I did. Oh, I saw it clear as day, and I let him. I spoke a little clearer, painted the pictures a little brighter, because some stories deserve to be remembered. They deserve to outlive the teller. Darnell and Tasha didn't see it that way. Their disrespect was a slow, constant drip, eroding the foundations of the home I helped build. They laughed, not with joy, but with derision, about my old Singer sewing machine, the very machine that stitched the clothes on Darnell's back. Tasha called my photographs, my precious memories of Harold and our life, dusty junk as she dusted around them, never touching the frames with care. Their whispers became less careful. "These kids don't need all that history, Darnell," Tasha hissed one evening, her voice carrying easily from the kitchen. "It's depressing. They need iPads, new shoes, a future. Not bedtime lectures about a past that's done and gone." She didn't know. She had no idea that my lectures were being carefully, faithfully preserved, that every time Malik hit that little red record button, another chapter of our legacy, of their legacy, was being written. She was so focused on the future, she failed to see that her children were building a bridge to the past, a bridge she was trying so hard to burn. The whispers from the kitchen became a constant, grating soundtrack to my days. They were the white noise of my own obsolescence, a low hum of planning my departure. I was no longer Lorraine Carter, mother, grandmother, survivor. I was a logistical problem, a square footage issue, a financial drain. I endured, for Malik, for Ayana. Their small, warm hands in mine were the only things that kept the cold fury in my heart from freezing solid. Their secret recordings were my rebellion, my quiet act of defiance against the erasure. They were planning, but every rebellion has its breaking point. It came on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were always Tasha's deep clean days, a ritual of aggressive sanitization that felt more like an exorcism of my presence than mere housekeeping. I was in my chair, my throne, watching her move through the living room with a vacuum cleaner roaring like an angry beast. She stopped at my small, cluttered side table. On it sat a small, tarnished silver frame. The photograph inside was faded, its colors softened by decades of sun and love. It was me and Harold on our 10th anniversary. We were at a cheap seaside resort that had just begun accepting black guests. We looked so young, so impossibly happy. Harold's arm was around me, pulling me close, and I was laughing, my head thrown back, utterly lost in the joy of the moment. The wind was catching my dress. We looked like we owned the entire ocean. Tosh picked up the frame, her lips pursed in a familiar expression of distaste. She pulled a disinfectant wipe from the pocket of her apron and began scrubbing at the glass. Her movements brisk and efficient. Then she paused. She wasn't looking at the glass. She was looking at the photograph itself. At us. Her sigh was a gust of profound irritation. She set the frame down, but not before turning it face down on the table with a definitive little click. The action was so small, so insignificant. To anyone else, it would have been nothing. A photograph turned over during dusting. A minor thing. But to me it was a declaration of war. It was the final, contemptuous gesture in a long campaign of disrespect. She wasn't just cleaning around my memory. She was actively turning her back on it. She was erasing Harold, erasing our joy, erasing the very proof that a life of love and struggle had existed long before her beige couch and her silent stainless steel refrigerator. A coldness, sharper than any winter wind I'd ever walked through, settled deep into my bones. The hum of the vacuum faded into a distant buzz. The world narrowed to the back of that silver frame, to the dismissive set of Tasha's shoulders as she moved on to attack the curtains. I did not move. I did not speak. The old springs of my chair were silent for once, holding their breath. Inside, the fire that had been banked for so long, the pride I had carried through marches and protests and a lifetime of being overlooked, roared to life. But it was a cold fire, a silent, calculating inferno. They see a piece of furniture. The voice in my head whispered, a voice that sounded like my own, but harder, older. They see a problem to be removed. They have no idea that this piece of furniture has a memory, They have no idea that this problem has claws. Asterisk, I thought of Malik's phone. The tiny red light. The library of truth he was building in the dark. It wasn't enough. Preserving the past was a defensive move. An act of remembrance. But they weren't just trying to make us forget. They were trying to make us disappear. A resolve, hard and diamond sharp, crystallized within me. It was over. The time for quiet endurance, for secret recordings, for biting my tongue as they plotted my exile in the next room, was done. They wanted to get rid of the past. Fine. But first, they were going to see it. They were going to hear it. They were going to understand, in no uncertain terms, exactly who they were dealing with. I waited until the vacuum's roar ceased and Tasha moved into the kitchen. I waited until the house was quiet. Then, with a slowness that felt ceremonial, I reached out a hand that did not tremble. I picked up the photograph of me and Harold. I turned it over, and I looked into our young, joyful faces. I traced the outline of Harold's smile. "Okay, my love," I whispered, my voice barely a breath. "It's time. No more whispering. No more hiding in the shadows." I placed the frame back on the table, facing out, a statement, a challenge. The plan unfolded in my mind, not as a frantic idea, but as a settled fact. It was simple. It was brutal. It was everything they deserved. They wanted to send me away to be forgotten. Then I would give them a story they would never, ever forget. I would use their own weapons, their obsession with appearance, their curated social media lives, their desperate need to present a perfect image to the world. Against them. Malik had given me the ammunition, a library of truth. All I had to do was pull the trigger. I leaned back in my chair, a small, grim smile touching my lips for the first time in years. The old springs groaned in agreement. Let them have their whispered plans. Let them have their nice places and their proper care. They were about to learn that the past isn't always quiet. Sometimes it speaks. And when it does, it has the voice of an 80-year-old woman who has nothing left to lose, and a fire in her soul that refuses to be extinguished. The game shows played on, but I was no longer watching. I was waiting. And for the first time in a long time, I was the one who held all the cards. The silence after the vacuum's roar felt different now. It wasn't an absence of sound. It was a gathering of intent. The air in the room was charged, thick with the promise of a storm I was about to unleash. I looked at Harold's smiling face in the photograph, now right side up, a defiant monument to a life they deemed unworthy of display. "Okay, my love," I had whispered. "It's time." And it was. But a rebellion, a true one, isn't fought with sentiment alone. It's fought with logistics, with information, with cold, hard numbers. They saw me as a financial drain. They were about to find out the true meaning of the word. The first step was reconnaissance. I needed to know the full extent of the battlefield. For years, I'd let things slide, content to let Tasha and David handle things, to let them lull me into a false sense of security while they systematically isolated me. No more. It was time to take inventory. I waited until the house was empty, the silence a willing accomplice. Tasha was at one of her endless committee meetings, David was at work, and the children were at school. I was alone, and for the first time, the solitude felt like power, not abandonment, with a grunt of effort that was more theatrical than necessary a performance for an audience of one. A reminder of my own supposed frailty, I pushed myself out of my chair. The old springs groaned a loyal farewell. I moved through the sterile living room, a ghost in my own home, my slippers whispering against the polished hardwood they'd installed after declaring my old rugs a trip hazard. My destination was the small, masculine study David used to pretend to work in. It was his sanctum, a room of dark wood and leather that smelled of lemon polish and self-importance. And in the bottom left drawer of his ridiculously large desk, he kept the files. He thought he was so clever, so organized. He was, and that was going to be his undoing. The drawer was, of course, locked. David loved his little symbols of control. I allowed myself a dry chuckle. Did he really think a flimsy Kayla could keep me out? This was the man who, for 20 years, couldn't find the ketchup in the refrigerator without my help. I reached into the pocket of my housecoat, my fingers, gnarled with arthritis but still knowing, closed around a small ring of rarely used keys. One of them, a small, silver one, was from a long-forgotten diary. I had a feeling, a lifetime of running a household on a tight budget teaches you to make do, to improvise. I slid the key into the lock. It resisted for a half-second, then turned with a smooth, satisfying click. The universe, it seemed, was on my side. The drawer slid open. Neat color-coded folders stared back at me. Utilities, mortgage, insurance, and there, a thick, royal blue one, labeled, with breathtaking arrogance, Mom, as if I were a pet or a project. My file, my life, reduced to invoices and statements. I carried the file back to my chair, my throne. I settled in, the weight of the paperwork heavy on my lap. I took a deep breath, the scent of old paper and ink a familiar comfort. This was my language. Balance sheets, ledgers, the unemotional arithmetic of survival. I opened the file, and I began to read page by page, line by line. The full, audacious scope of their betrayal revealed itself. It wasn't just the whispers about Sunset Acres. It was everything. The direct debits from my pension account for the household fund, the automatic payments from my savings for the mortgage on this very house, the house Harold and I had bought, the house whose deeds still had my name on it right next to his. The monthly management fees David had set up for himself, for overseeing my affairs. I saw the receipts for the new couch, the stainless steel refrigerator, the flat-screen television that was always on, all paid for with my money, my safety net, the money Harold and I had scrimped and saved for our entire lives. The money that was supposed to see me through to the end was being used to fund the very lifestyle that was meant to replace me. A cold, meticulous fury settled over me, sharper and more focused than any hot rage. I was an accountant of my own ruin. I did the math. I calculated the total financial damage, the slow, steady bleed they had inflicted over the last 5 years. The number that stared back at me from the back of an old envelope, written in my shaky but clear script, was staggering. It was a number that represented not just theft, but a profound, calculated disrespect. They wanted to send me away because I was a financial drain. I would show them a financial drain. The library of truth Malik had given me was the moral high ground. But this file in my lap, this was the weapon. This was the leverage. I reached for the ancient rotary phone on the side table. Its weight was solid, substantial. A tool, not a toy. It didn't play games or take pictures. It connected you to other people. And that was all I needed. My first call was to the bank. I navigated the automated menus with a patience I didn't feel, my heart hammering a steady, determined rhythm against my ribs. Finally, a human voice. Yes. Hello, I said, my voice clear and firm. The voice I used to use when I was head of the PTA and wouldn't take no for an answer. This is Lorraine Carter. I'd like to speak to someone about my accounts. There seems to be some unauthorized activity. The word hung in the air, heavy and precise. Unauthorized. An hour later, it was done. Every automatic transfer, every direct debit set up by David or Tasha, was canceled. The financial life support, keeping their comfortable illusion afloat, had been switched off. The bank, after verifying my identity with questions only I could answer, Harold's middle name, the street we lived on when we first married, was appalled and apologetic. They promised new cards, new account numbers, and a full fraud investigation. I thanked them politely and hung up. The next call was to the mortgage company. I confirmed that the house was, indeed, still in mine and Harold's name. I instructed them that all future payments were to be put on hold pending a review of the title. Let David try and explain a missed mortgage payment to his golf buddies. Call by call, I severed the lines, the utilities put back in my name, the insurance redirected to my attention. I was methodical, calm, relentless. I was not a crazy old woman. I was a client, a customer, the account holder. With each call, I felt a piece of my sovereignty return. I was no longer a passenger in my own life. I was back at the controls. The fire in my soul was no longer a raging inferno. It was the steady, efficient burn of a furnace, generating power. I finished the last call just as I heard the garage door rumble open. Tasha's car, perfect timing. I closed the blue folder, smoothed my housecoat, and folded my hands in my lap. The evidence was back in the drawer, the little silver key tucked safely in my pocket. On the television, a game show contestant was jumping up and down, winning a new car. The audience screamed with vicarious joy. I didn't react. I sat perfectly still, the ghost of a smile playing on my lips. The photograph of Harold and I faced the room. a testament to a joy they could never understand and a strength they had fatally underestimated. I heard Tasha's key in the door, her brisk footsteps in the hall. She walked into the living room, dumping her bags on the beige couch with a sigh. God, what a day, she muttered, not even looking at me. She headed straight for the kitchen. I heard the fridge door open, then a moment of silence. Then she called out, her voice tinged with a familiar irritation. Lorraine, did you finish the last of the orange juice? I was going to make a smoothie. I didn't answer. I just kept watching the television, my expression serene. She appeared in the doorway, holding the empty carton. Lorraine, the juice. I slowly turned my head, meeting her gaze for the first time. My eyes were clear, sharp. No confusion. No submission. No, dear, I said, my voice quiet but carrying perfectly across the room. I didn't touch it. I let the silence hang between us, a new, unfamiliar weight in the air. Then I turned back to the game show, leaving her standing there, holding the empty carton, a vague and unsettling doubt beginning to cloud her features. The first move had been made. The pieces were in motion. Let them try to figure out why the money had stopped. Let them whisper about that. The game, as they knew it, was over. A new one had just begun. The silence after Tasha left the room was louder than any argument. It was a vacuum of understanding, and I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head, trying to process a malfunction in her perfectly ordered world. She hadn't found the words, she'd just stood there, the empty juice carton dangling from her hand, before retreating back into the kitchen with a clipped, "I'll go to the store later." A small, petty victory, but a victory nonetheless. It was a stone dropped into the still pond of their control, and I was watching the ripples spread, but a single stone wasn't enough. I needed an avalanche. The blue folder had given me the cold, hard numbers of their theft, but I needed the why, the depth of the betrayal, the whispers that had turned into plans. I needed to move from defense to intelligence gathering. I needed to understand the enemy's camp from the inside. The opportunity presented itself 2 days later, disguised as a chore. Tasha, her mood still brittle from the unexplained financial hiccups she was surely starting to notice, announced she was taking me to my ophthalmologist's appointment. "David's too busy, and I need to pick up a prescription anyway," she said, her tone implying a great personal sacrifice. I merely nodded, the picture of docile gratitude. "Thank you, dear. My eyes have been so tired lately." A perfect lie. My vision had never been clearer. The doctor's office was in a medical plaza next to a large, soulless supermarket. As Tasha helped me from the car, her grip firmer than necessary. A performance of duty, I formulated my plan. "While you get your prescription, Tasha, I think I'll wait in the cafe next door," I said, pointing to a small, generic coffee shop with metal tables out front. "The fluorescents in the pharmacy give me a headache." This was also a lie. I loved the bright, orderly light of a well-stocked store. But it was a lie she would believe. She hesitated, her eyes flicking from me to the supermarket entrance and back. I could see the calculation, risk leaving me alone versus the hassle of maneuvering me through the crowded store. The hassle won. "Fine, don't move. I'll be 15 minutes. I'll be right here," I promised. I settled at a table outside the cafe with a cup of tea. I had no intention of drinking, my purse clutched in my lap. I watched Tasha disappear into the automatic doors of the supermarket, a soldier on a mission. The moment she was out of sight, I stood up. My mission was different. I didn't go to the supermarket. I turned and walked, with a purpose that belied my shuffling gait, toward a smaller, older strip mall across the street. Harold and I had come here for years. There was a hardware store Harold loved, a dusty, wonderful place that smelled of cut wood and metal shavings, and next to it, a small travel agency, Wanderlust, run by an old friend of ours, Eleanor Shaw. Eleanor and I had served together on the town's historical society board for 2 decades. She was a sharp, witty woman with a laugh like breaking glass and a mind like a steel trap. She had also been a good friend to Harold, helping him plan the surprise trip to Italy for our 30th anniversary. We'd lost touch these last few years, another casualty of Tasha and David's gentle, insistent isolation. "She's so busy, Lorraine," Tasha would say. "You don't want to bother her." The bell above the door of Wanderlust jingled a familiar, cheerful note. The office was smaller than I remembered, but blessedly unchanged. Posters of tropical beaches and European castles adorned the walls, and there, behind a cluttered desk, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, was Eleanor. She looked up, a professional smile on her face that quickly melted into genuine shock. Lorraine Carter. My God, I almost didn't recognize you. I felt a pang of self-consciousness, acutely aware of my dowdy housecoat and unkempt hair. I looked like the woman they said I was. Hello, Eleanor. She stood up and came around the desk, giving me a careful but warm hug. It's so good to see you. What are you doing here? Don't tell me you're finally taking my advice and booking a cruise. The Greek Isles are magnificent this time of year. I forced a smile. Not today, Eleanor. I'm just waiting for Tasha next door. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the mention of Tasha's name. Ah, I see. She gestured to a client chair. Well, sit. Tell me everything. How are you holding up? I lowered myself into the chair, my mind racing. How to begin? I decided on the direct approach. With Eleanor, it was the only way. Truthfully, Eleanor, I'm not sure. She leaned forward, her sharp eyes missing nothing. I was so sorry to hear about the plans. It must be very difficult. I went very still. The plans. The words hung in the air between us, charged and lethal. She knew about Sunset Acres. I kept my voice steady. A masterclass in deception. It's been a lot to process. They're so insistent it's for the best. Eleanor let out a short, derisive puff of air. Best for whom? I'll tell you who it's best for. That daughter-in-law of yours. She lowered her voice. Though we were alone. She was in here not 2 months ago. My heart stopped. Tosh, here, asking about group rates, Eleanor said, her lips pressed into a thin line. For a family reunion. But she was vague on the details. Wanted brochures for resorts, all-inclusives. Seemed very excited about it. Then, last month, David popped in. Every word was a hammer blow. David came to— He did, Eleanor nodded, her expression grim. He was more direct. Asked about cancellation policies for a major booking. Said there might be a big change coming up for the family and they might need to postpone a vacation. He was jittery, not like himself at all. She leaned in closer. Lorraine, I've known David since he was a boy trying to stuff frogs in his pockets. He was lying to me. I can always tell. The pieces were crashing together in my mind, forming a picture more ugly than I had imagined. They weren't just siphoning my money. They were planning to use it to go on a lavish vacation the moment they shipped me off. My eviction was to be their bon voyage party. I didn't know. I whispered, the genuine shock in my voice not needing to be faked. Eleanor's face softened with pity. I thought you knew. I assumed that's why you were, well, why we hadn't seen you. I figured you were angry with the whole world. She reached out and patted my hand. I am so sorry, Lorraine. I should have said something. But it's not my place to interfere in family business. No, I said, my voice finding its strength again. No, you've done more than enough by telling me. Thank you, Eleanor. The bell on the door jingled again. We both looked up. Tasha stood in the doorway, her face a mask of confusion and dawning fury. Her shopping bags hung from her hands. She'd gone looking for me. Lorraine, she said, her voice dangerously calm. What are you doing in here? I've been looking everywhere for you. Eleanor instantly became a professional again, her face smoothing into a neutral expression. Tasha, how lovely to see you. I was just showing Lorraine some brochures for the Lake District. She always said she wanted to go. It was a brilliant, quick-witted lie. Tasha's eyes narrowed, scanning us both for the truth. She didn't believe it for a second. We have to go, Tasha said flatly. Now, I stood up, my legs trembling not from weakness, but from adrenaline. It was good to see you, Eleanor. Thank you for the travel tips. Eleanor gave me a look that was worth more than any file full of numbers. It was a look of solidarity. A look that said, I'm on your side. Anytime, Lorraine. You know where I am. Tasha practically marched me out of the shop and across the street, her grip vice-like on my arm. She didn't say a word until she had shoved me into the passenger seat and slammed the door. She got in the driver's side, her entire body rigid with anger. What were you doing in there? She hissed, not looking at me. I told you, I was looking at brochures, I said, staring straight ahead. Don't lie to me, she spat, starting the car with a violent twist of the key. You were talking to her. What did she say to you? What did you say to her? I turned my head slowly and looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fear now, sharp and acrid, underneath the anger. She was terrified of what I might have learned. We talked about the weather, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion, and the rest of the car ride was silent, a thick, smothering silence. Tasha's mind was racing. I could see it in the tight set of her jaw. The carefully constructed narrative of my incapacity was cracking, and she was scrambling to patch it. But she was too late. Eleanor had given me the final piece of the puzzle. They weren't just stealing from me. They were celebrating my exile. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was profoundly, personally cruel. As we pulled into the garage, the door rumbling shut behind us like a portcullis, I knew the intelligence gathering phase was over. I had the numbers. I had the motive. Now, it was time to stop playing defense. The game wasn't just beginning. It was time to change the rules entirely. The garage door sealed us in, the mechanical groan echoing in the confined space like a tomb closing. Tasha killed the engine, but she didn't move. The silence was a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. "I don't know what you think you're doing, Lorraine," she said finally, her voice low and controlled, each word chiseled from ice. "But you are confused. Your memory plays tricks on you. Eleanor is a lovely woman, but she's a gossip. She loves to stir up drama." I unclipped my seatbelt. The click unnaturally loud. "My memory is perfectly clear, Tasha. It's my vision that's improved." I didn't wait for a response. I opened my door and walked into the house, leaving her sitting in the dark. The power shift was subtle, but it was real. She could no longer pretend I was a docile, fading old woman. She could shuttle from appointment to appointment. I had agency, and I had an ally. Up in my room, with the door locked, I replayed everything Eleanor had said. Group rates, cancellation, policies, a big change. They weren't just planning to move me. They were planning a victory lap with my money. The sheer audacity of it burned away the last vestiges of my hesitation. They had weaponized my love for my son, turning it into a weakness they could exploit. It was time I showed them. It was my greatest strength. The next morning, I initiated phase 2, social and legal attack. The first salvo was social. It was Thursday, Bridge Day. For 25 years, a rotating group of 4 women from the Historical Society and Garden Club had met at each other's houses for afternoon bridge. It was a ritual of gossip, gentle competition, and weak tea. Tasha had gently ended my participation years ago, citing my fatigue. "They'll understand, Lorraine. It's for the best." I waited until I heard David's car leave for work and Tasha go downstairs to her basement gym. I moved quietly to the hall telephone, my heart hammering against my ribs. I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Marge. It's Lorraine. Lorraine Carter." "Lorraine, good heavens, is everything all right?" Marge's voice was full of genuine concern. I was a ghost calling from the past. "I'm fine, dear. I was just wondering. Your bridge group still meets today, doesn't it?" "Why, yes. It's at my house this week. We assumed you weren't up for it anymore." Her tone was delicately apologetic. "I'd like to come," I said, injecting a fragile, hopeful note into my voice, "if it's not too much trouble. I've been so lonely lately." It was a performance worthy of an Oscar, and it worked perfectly. "Oh, Lorraine, of course. We'd love to have you. 1 o'clock. Don't you dare bring a thing." I hung up, a grim smile on my face. The invitation was secured. Now, for my entrance. An hour later, I heard Tasha showering. I went to my closet and pushed past the shapeless cardigans and housecoats Tasha had bought me. In the very back, shrouded in a garment bag, was the outfit I'd worn to Harold's retirement dinner, a tailored lilac suit and a single string of good pearls. I put it on. I styled my hair as best I could. I applied a faint dusting of powder and a touch of lipstick. I looked in the mirror. I didn't look like a powerful avenger. I looked like a dignified, put-together woman. It was the perfect disguise. I walked downstairs at 12:30. Tasha was in the kitchen, slicing an apple. She turned, and the knife clattered onto the counter. "What are you wearing?" she asked, her voice a mixture of confusion and alarm. "I'm going to bridge at Marge Henderson's," I said pleasantly, as if announcing I was taking a breath of air. "Bridge? You can't go to bridge. You haven't been in years. You'll get overwhelmed, tired." She was sputtering, her carefully managed world tilting on its axis. "Nonsense," I said, waving a dismissive hand. "I feel wonderful today. It will be good for me. The doctor said I need more social stimulation." Another flawless lie. I've already called Marge. She's expecting me. I saw the panic in her eyes. She couldn't physically restrain me without it being obvious. She couldn't call David fast enough. She was trapped. I'll drive you, she said, scrambling for control. That's not necessary. I've already called a cab. I smiled. It should be here any minute. The look on her face was priceless. A cab? In her world, women like me didn't take cabs. We were driven by our families. It was an act of profound independence, and it terrified her. The cab arrived. I left her standing in the doorway, a statue of pure, impotent rage. The bridge game was a masterpiece of strategic revelation. I was warm, I was lucid, I was rememberful. I asked about their grandchildren, recalled old stories, and laughed in the right places. I let them see Lorraine Carter, whole and complete. Then, as Marge dealt the first hand, I gently lowered the bomb. I'm so glad to be here, I said with a sigh. It's been a difficult few months. With all the planning, dear, asked Beatrice. The biggest gossip in the county, for the move, I said, my voice dipping just enough to sound sad, to Sunset Acres. David and Tasha have been so diligent about it. I'm just sorry it means they had to cancel their big vacation too. Where was it, again? The Caribbean? Some all-inclusive? They were so looking forward to it. But my needs come first, of course. I let the words hang in the air. 4 pairs of eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The unspoken question was deafening. Asterisk, they're moving her to a home and going on a Caribbean vacation. Asterisk, Sunset Acres, Marge said carefully. But Lorraine, are you sure that's necessary? Oh, David and Tasha insist, I said, offering a brave, wobbly smile. They say it's for the best. They've been handling all my finances to make it easier. They're such good children. I had just handed them the juiciest, most scandalous piece of gossip they'd heard in a decade. Wrapped in a bow of maternal devotion, by nightfall, everyone in our social circle would know David and Tasha's reputation, their carefully cultivated image of benevolent caretakers, would be in tatters. I returned home 3 hours later, buoyed by the victory. The house was silent. Tasha was nowhere to be seen. Up in my room, I locked the door and took out my notepad. Social attack, successful. Now, for the legal one. I opened my purse and took out the business card Eleanor had slipped into my hand during our hug. It wasn't for her travel agency. It was for a lawyer, Mark Stevenson. Scrawled on the back in Eleanor's quick handwriting was, * specializes in elder law, helped the Donnellys, discreet. * I called his office. A efficient-sounding assistant answered. I'd like to schedule a consultation with Mr. Stevenson, I said, my voice clear and firm. And what is the nature of your legal issue? She asked. I took a deep breath, looking out the window at the garden Harold and I had planted together. I believe my son and daughter-in-law are financially exploiting me, I said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating, and I need to make sure they can't put me in a home. The assistant was silent for a beat, her professionalism recalibrating. I see. Mr. Stevenson has a cancellation tomorrow morning at 10. Can you make that? Yes, I said. I can. I hung up. The die was cast. The community's eyes were now on them. Soon, the law's eyes would be, too. They thought they were moving me out. They never considered I might fight back. And they certainly never considered I might win. The house was a mausoleum of quiet tension for the rest of the day. Tasha didn't speak to me. She didn't bring me dinner. It was a petty, juvenile punishment, but it told me everything I needed to know. The social attack had struck its target with devastating accuracy. Her silence was the sound of her reputation crumbling. That night, I didn't sleep. I rehearsed what I would say to the lawyer. I organized the facts in my mind like evidence for a trial. The canceled vacation, the sudden push for Sunset Acres, the control over my accounts. It was a clear, ugly pattern. The next morning, I executed my escape with military precision. I waited for Tasha to leave for her weekly grocery trip. The moment her car disappeared down the street, I moved. I was dressed and downstairs in 60 seconds. Another cab pre-ordered was waiting at the curb. Mark Stevenson's office was all dark wood and quiet efficiency. He was a man in his 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a demeanor that was both compassionate and fiercely focused. He listened without interruption as I laid out my case, my voice steady, my timeline precise. When I finished, he leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Mrs. Carter, what you've described is a textbook case of undue influence and financial exploitation. The first thing we need to do is establish your mental competency, which, based on this conversation, is not in question. The second is to immediately freeze your assets and regain control. He outlined a plan: a swift petition to the court, a temporary restraining order against David and Tasha regarding my finances and my person, a court-appointed evaluator. It was swift, it was brutal, and it was exactly what I needed. They are planning to move me soon, I said, perhaps within the week. Then we moved today, he replied, picking up his phone. I returned home, my purse containing a sheaf of legal documents that felt like a shield. The cab dropped me off just as Tasha's car was pulling into the driveway. The look on her face was a toxic mix of fury and panic. She knew she'd undoubtedly gotten a dozen phone calls from concerned friends. She stormed into the house. After me. Where have you been? Do you have any idea the embarrassment you've caused? Before I could answer, David's car screeched to a halt outside. He burst through the front door, his face flushed with anger. Mom, what is this nonsense? Marge Henderson just called me about, accusing us of stealing from you to go on vacation. The confrontation was here. It was time. It's not nonsense, David, I said, my voice calm, cutting through his bluster. It's the truth. And we're not quite done yet. As if on cue, a dark sedan pulled up behind David's car. Two people got out, Mark Stevenson and a stern-looking woman with a briefcase. David's anger morphed into confusion. Who are you? Mark Stevenson, Mrs. Carter's attorney, he said, handing David a thick envelope. And this is Ms. Evans, from Adult Protective Services. We have a court order here, effective immediately, freezing all of Mrs. Carter's accounts and granting her sole power of attorney until this matter is resolved. You and your wife are also enjoined from attempting to remove her from this residence. Tasha let out a strangled gasp. David stared at the papers, his hands trembling. This is a mistake, Mom. Tell them, we're taking care of you. You were managing me, David, I said, the years of hurt finally breaking through my calm facade. You and your wife were managing me toward a home so you could spend my money. The money your father and I worked our entire lives for. You weaponized my love for you. The apps officer stepped forward. We'll need to see all financial records immediately, and we'll need to speak with Mrs. Carter alone. What followed was a humiliating collapse for them. Bank statements were produced, transfer requests to travel companies were found. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Their lies were laid bare in the harsh, fluorescent light of the kitchen, witnessed by an officer of the court. Their carefully constructed world evaporated in an afternoon. The social shame was absolute. The legal repercussions were severe. They were allowed to stay in the house, but it was no longer theirs. It was mine. The silence that descended wasn't one of tension, but of defeat. Theirs. A week later, a for sale sign went up in their yard. They were moving, not me. A small condo across town, paid for with their own money. The community had shunned them. They were pariahs. I stood at my bedroom window, watching the sign sway in the breeze. The war was over. I had one dot. The doorbell rang. It was Eleanor, holding a bottle of champagne. For the victor, she said with a grin. We sat in the garden Harold and I had planted, the late afternoon sun warming our faces. We didn't talk about David or Tasha. We talked about the past, about our husbands, about the future. What will you do with the house, Lorraine? She asked gently. Sell it, I said, without a trace of hesitation. It's too full of ghosts now, good and bad. I looked around at the blooming flowers Harold had loved. I'm thinking of a nice apartment. Maybe one of those new, senior complexes downtown, the one with the art classes and the day trips. Eleanor raised her glass. 2 new dawns. I clinked my glass against hers. The peace I felt was profound. It wasn't just the quiet after the storm. It was the quiet of self-possession, hard-won and deserved. I had lost my son, but I had found myself again. I had been Lorraine Carter, the fighter, and now I would get to be Lorraine Carter, the woman who lived on her own terms once more. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories like this.